You're at dinner with your parents. You mention something about work, maybe that you're thinking of switching jobs, or that you need a mental health day, or that your generation can't afford houses the way theirs could. The response comes fast. Back in my day, we just push through. You have to pay your dues first. Nobody handed us anything. And suddenly you're not having a conversation anymore. You're defending your entire existence to someone who seems to be living in a different reality. Here's what nobody tells you about that moment. Your parents aren't trying to dismiss you. Their brain was trained for a world that no longer exists. And the instincts that help them survive that world now create friction in this one. Same situation, completely different operating system. What looks like stubbornness is often pattern recognition from a different era. What sounds like criticism is sometimes the only language they learned for love. This video breaks down the three psychological imprints that shaped the boomer generation, born between 1946 and 1964, and why those imprints create such specific tensions with the generations that came after. There's also a quick test near the middle to identify which imprint shaped your parents most, because once you understand what's underneath their reactions, the conversations change. You stop arguing about conclusions and start seeing the wiring that produced them. One note before we start. Not every boomer is the same. This isn't about stereotyping 60 million people. It's about patterns, the shared environments, messages, and pressures that shaped a generation's default settings. Your parents might fit all three imprints or just one. The goal is understanding, not diagnosis. Let's start with imprint 1 because this one explains more intergenerational conflict than almost anything else. Imprint 1 is stability as survival. Boomers came of age in a world where institutions worked. You got a job at a company, stayed for decades, received a pension, retired with security. Career ladders existed and actually led somewhere. Hard work reliably converted into upward mobility. The American dream wasn't a meme. It was a reasonable expectation for a significant portion of the population. This environment trained a specific belief: follow the rules, respect the system, and the system will take care of you. Order wasn't just preference. It was the strategy that produced results. So when boomers emphasize doing things the right way, when they seem skeptical of rapid cultural change, when they trust authority figures younger generations openly question, they're not being blindly obedient. They're running software that worked for most of their lives. Here's how this shows up: a resistance to unconventional career paths because deviation from the latter feels genuinely risky to them. Discomfort with job hopping, remote work, or gig economy choices that seem unstable. Advice that sounds like just work your way up even when the ladder has been removed. They're not ignoring your reality. They're applying their reality to your situation because that's what brains do. The tension comes when stability stops being available. Younger generations face a world where institutions have failed repeatedly. Economic crashes, housing crises, corporate layoffs despite record profits. The rules stopped working. But to someone whose entire identity was built on trusting those rules, hearing "the system is broken" can feel like a personal attack rather than an observation. To them, stability isn't boring or outdated. It's survival. And watching their children reject it can trigger genuine fear masked as frustration. Imprint 2 is work equals worth. In many boomer households, your job wasn't just what you did for money. It was who you were. A man's identity was often inseparable from his career. A woman's value in that era's framing was tied to running the household with the same dedication. Work ethic wasn't a trait, it was a moral framework. If you worked hard, you were a good person. If you struggled, the first question was whether you'd tried hard enough. This environment trained a specific equation: effort equals character. Your output is your proof. Rest is earned, not given. And if you're not producing, something is wrong with you. Here's how this shows up: judgment that comes fast when they perceive someone isn't working hard enough, even if that perception is based on outdated metrics. Discomfort with creative careers, remote work, or anything that doesn't look like traditional labor. Difficulty understanding burnout, because in their framework, you push through. The body keeps going until the job is done. Phrases like "nobody wants to work anymore" aren't necessarily malicious. They're the collision of an old framework with a new reality it can't parse. The tension is obvious. If your self-worth was built through output, rest can feel like danger. Taking a mental health day doesn't register as self-care. It registers as weakness, maybe even moral failure. So when their children prioritize work-life balance, set boundaries, or refuse to sacrifice health for productivity, it can read as laziness rather than wisdom. They're not always trying to shame you. Sometimes they're projecting their own fear, the terror of what happens if you stop earning your right to exist. That fear was trained into them. They're passing it on the only way they know how. There's another layer here worth understanding. Many boomers sacrificed enormously for their work. Missed family moments, damaged health, deferred dreams. and they did it believing the trade was necessary and noble. When younger generations refuse to make the same trade, it can feel like an indictment, like their sacrifice was pointless, like you're saying they did it wrong. That's not what you're saying, but that's sometimes what they hear. The defensiveness isn't just about you. It's about protecting the meaning of their own choices. Before Imprint 3, let's make this concrete. Quick test. Think about your boomer parent or relative as you answer these. First, were they obsessed with stability and doing it the right way? Did they seem to trust institutions long after those institutions stopped deserving trust? That's Imprint 1 showing up. Second, do they treat work like a measure of character? Do they get uncomfortable when someone isn't visibly productive or when rest isn't earned? That's Imprint 2. Third, do they struggle with emotional language but show love through acts of service, responsibility, or providing? Do they seem allergic to therapy speak or dismiss feelings as something to manage privately? That's Imprint 3. Most boomers carry all three to some degree, but one usually dominates. Identifying it helps you understand what's really happening when conversations get tense. Imprint 3 is emotional containment as maturity. Many boomers were raised in homes where emotions were private. You didn't talk about feelings, you managed them. Crying was weakness. Vulnerability was dangerous. Therapy was for people who couldn't handle life on their own. The message was clear. Mature adults control their inner world. They don't burden others with it. This wasn't cruelty. It was the dominant cultural script. Post-war parents had survived genuine trauma and processed it through silence, stoicism, and forward motion. They taught their children the same strategy because it was the only one they had. Emotional suppression wasn't a flaw. It was a survival skill passed down like a family recipe. Here's how this shows up. Discomfort when conversations get emotionally deep. Changing the subject when feelings arise. Phrases like, "you'll be fine," or "don't dwell on it," that sound dismissive but often mean, "I don't know how to help you with this." Difficulty saying "I love you" directly while showing it through. Actions, fixing things, providing financially, showing up reliably. The love is real. The language for it is limited. The tension emerges when younger generations, raised in a culture that values emotional expression and processing, try to connect with parents who are trained to contain. It can feel like hitting a wall. You want to be seen, and they want to fix. You want to talk about how you feel, and they want to talk about what you're going to do. Neither is wrong. They're just operating from different definitions of what support looks like. They're not always cold. They're often contained, holding things together the way they were taught, unsure how to open without unraveling. So, how do you actually communicate across these imprints? Here are 3 translation rules that work. First, lead with respect, not correction. Boomers were raised to value hierarchy and experience. When you open with, "that's outdated," or "you don't understand," their defenses activate before you've made your point. Try instead, "help me understand your logic on this," or "I'm curious how you see it." You're not surrendering your perspective. You're creating space for them to share theirs without feeling dismissed. That space often leads to real conversation. Second, frame change as safety. Remember Imprint 1. Stability is survival. If you want them to accept something new, connect it to security rather than progress. Here's why this reduces risk lands better than "this is just better." This path has more stability built in, works better than "times have changed." You're speaking their language. The idea can be the same. The framing determines whether they hear it. Third, ask for stories instead of opinions. Opinions trigger debate. Stories trigger memory, and memory often carries more nuance than a stated position. Instead of, "what do you think about this?" try, "what was it like when you first started working?" Or, "how did your parents handle that kind of thing?" You might hear something that reframes everything. And even if you don't, you've moved from argument to understanding. Here's what I need you to take from this. The boomer generation isn't a monolith of stubbornness or outdated thinking. They're people who were shaped by specific conditions: post-war optimism, institutional trust, work-based identity, emotional stoicism, and those conditions produced patterns that made sense at the time. The friction you feel isn't because they don't love you or respect you. It's because they're running software built for a world that dissolved, and updating it feels like betraying everything that got them this far. Understanding doesn't mean agreeing. You don't have to adopt their framework, but seeing where it came from can change the temperature of every conversation. You stop taking the comments personally. You start hearing the fear underneath the criticism, the love underneath the silence, the confusion underneath the dismissiveness. That shift won't fix everything. Some gaps are too wide to bridge, but for many families, it's enough to turn conflict into something softer, something that at least feels like you're trying to reach each other, even when you land in different places. So tell me, which imprint shaped your parents most? Which one finally explained something you've been frustrated by for years? Drop it in the comments. I want to know which part clicked. If this reframed how you see your family, subscribe. We break down the psychology behind everyday patterns in a way that actually makes sense. The next video explores the flip side, the psychology of Gen Z, how their generation was shaped by completely different forces, and why the clash between boomers and Gen Z isn't random. It's predictable once you see the wiring. I'll see you there.